Speaking of Courage podcast. What's up, everybody?
What's going on, guys?
What's going on, Chase?
Same old stuff.
Same old thing. Have a good weekend?
Yeah, so far so good.
Yeah. That's my weekend.
I was going to say, it looks like I had a better weekend than you did, I'll say.
The last 2 weeks just been tearing my house apart. One job turns into another. To remodel the kitchen, which turns into the living room, which turns into the bathroom, and so on and so forth.
So it's better just to not start, and then you don't have to deal with any of that.
I managed to do that for about 8 years, so...
Just move out, man. Get another house.
Yeah, exactly. So what do we got today?
Today we're doing...
the most infamous!
Well, not infamous.
What's infamous?
It's usually... Well... They use it incorrectly now, but it's famous for negative connotation, basically.
Oh, infamous is?
Yeah. Remember, you've seen the Three Amigos? I don't know. I'm asking this. The infamous El Guapo. That means he's super famous or whatever. Yeah. You hear it used incorrectly a lot, but if someone's infamous, it's
negative?
They're famous for bad reasons is what it's supposed to be.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
So famous then.
He's famous. One of the most famous, one of the most revered, one of the most beloved veterans in the United States.
I wonder if people listening right now, if they know. Do you think it's on the tip of their tongue?
Some people.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the listeners that we have, I think a few of them
would know. The most famous
know.
Medal of Honor recipient ever, this is the one?
I would say so, yeah. When you think of Medal of Honor recipients, for people who know military history, he's one of the ones that's going to be the quickest to come to mind. One of the most famous veterans in general, one of the most modern, famous modern soldiers, one of the most famous soldiers of World War II. Any way you want to categorize it, he's going to come up on the top of those.
Boom, boom.
Boom, boom, boom.
Audie Murphy?
Audie Murphy. So today we're going Audie Leon Murphy. So
I like when their name kind of sounds cool too.
He sounds country to me.
Yeah.
It's Audie Murphy, Audie Leon Murphy sounds Texas to me.
Like Wetzel,
which is what
Wetzel
Gary
sounds
Wetzel.
badass. Gary is such a powerful name. Any other names that you can think of?
We had Clarence Craft. That's kind of the opposite. Clarence rolls together with the alliteration, but Clarence by itself.
But Craft sounds tough.
Yeah, just the single syllable,
Who else? Is
kind of tough.
Any others that just kind of like make it, you're like, okay, that's a good name.
That we've done.
Norton?
Some that we haven't done. Jack Treadwell's kind of cool.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, there's plenty out there.
There's another one that we did where the name backed it up. Oh, man. I'm going to forget.
Yeah, you'd have to go through. George Wallen?
Yeah, that sounds like
that's
a
the
tough,
Navy Corpsman.
dude.
Yeah. They all sound tough to me because I know who they are after the fact, so it's hard for me to look at them the other way. Yeah, but Audie Murphy is Audie Murphy. He's iconic in his own right. What do you know about Audie Murphy, Donnie? I'll start
Audie Murphy, I just know very decorated. He's got a bunch of medals, and he was a movie star.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
So that's often the way that people look at him. He's generally described as the most decorated soldier of World War II, or the most decorated combat veteran of World War II, or combat soldier, etc. That kind of depends on how you want to look at things, because MacArthur had a lot more awards than him. Those were earned over the span of World War I, prior to World War I, and World War II. But
MacArthur, another name, and
General
Patton,
MacArthur,
another name.
there you go. Just keeping them coming. There's other combat soldiers. I think Maurice Britt had similar decorations, but Audie Murphy had every medal for valor that you can earn from our country and others from other nations.
Every single one.
Every single of the top valor medals. So by the end of the war, Audie Murphy earned the Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, multiple Purple Hearts, multiple Bronze Stars, awards from other countries, anything you could do.
All from
Audie
different
Murphy.
actions.
All from different actions, yeah. These are all individual actions. So it was just one after another, after another, after another. So that's kind of the genesis of his fame. In addition to that, like you talked about, he did survive the war, and he became a movie star. He starred in dozens of old Western movies. A lot of people have probably seen his movies and never realized who he was, that he was that combat soldier. But kind of the big thing about him that made him so iconic was he looked like he was 15 years old.
I was going to say, he was really small, right?
Yeah, when he joined the Army, he was 5'5" and 112 pounds. And
5'5", 112?
Yeah.
Wow,
and he looked every inch of it. So we've had some of the other soldiers or Marines that we've talked about. It's like, Jack Lucas. There's another name for you.
Jack Lucas.
He's 14, but he looks 20. Audie Murphy, as a 25-year-old, still looked 18. His nickname's Babyface. He looked like a small child. He was, every bit of his 112 pounds was of a malnutritioned young child was there. But he was just a force of nature in combat, and he couldn't be stopped. And I think that it's almost like a walking underdog in a sense. When you see him, and that's another thing, when you see him, even in his movie To Hell and Back or in some of the stuff, people are like, wow, he looks so young. That's 10, 15 years after the fact. When you look at the period photos, when you look at the period photos of him in World War II, it's insane when you see how little he looks. To imagine this guy doing these great things, it's almost unimaginable, but there's so many eyewitnesses and there's so many stories. And when you talk to guys that served with him, or if you read, their stories, there's so many actions he didn't get medals for that are just above and beyond as well.
So he was just a beast.
Just a beast, just born for combat in a sense. You know?
Man. So how old, or where was he from?
Texas.
He's from... Go figure, right?
Yeah, nobody...
So
Audie Murphy couldn't have been born anywhere other than Texas. But that's another big part of his story. So a lot of these guys, they come from these backgrounds. You talk about it a lot. Oh, well, they're the oldest of the kids, or they're this, or they've had this responsibility, or whatever it may be. Audie Murphy was born in Hunt County, Texas in 1925 to a family of sharecroppers. Dirt poor.
Sharecroppers was the same thing we talked about a while back, right?
Right, with the farmers where you're living on somebody else's land, basically. They don't even own the land they live on. They're basically renting out a house. They're eking out a living, if you will. Just dry and dusty cotton fields, as miserable as it gets. When he was born, he was the seventh of nine kids in his family that lived to adulthood. And 2 of them had already died, right? And 1 stillborn. So of the living children, 9 lived to adulthood. He's the 7th. So this poor Irish family, barely surviving, they don't have enough money to even feed the kids, and this is what he's born into.
Why did the poor have so many kids back then?
There's a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is Catholics didn't use birth control, and a lot of the immigrant populations are Catholic.
Was there anything to it where, like, the more kids you have, the more workers you have for your family?
Yeah, on the farms, it would have been that way, definitely. And that's going to be one of those things with Audie Murphy. He's born in 1925 in Hunt County, Texas. When he's born, they have no electricity, no running water, nothing in the house. You're going to the bathroom in the outhouse and things. Being born, they call the doctor, and the doctor's going to come over there. The oldest kids are working. As soon as Audie Murphy's old enough to move around as a baby, his mom's strapping him on her back like a papoose, and she's out working in the fields.
That's crazy.
Right? This is the life that he's born into. So as a little baby, he's out in the fields, even though he's not working. And as soon as he's old enough to walk and crawl, he's out in the fields working, right?
Yeah.
Now, this isn't the more kids you have, the more successful you're going to be, because you're just going to stay dirt poor. Audie Murphy's dad, to be generous, was a poor planner, as Audie Murphy said. But what everybody else called him was he's just a dirtbag, no account, low life loser. Audie later said in his life, every time my dad couldn't feed the kids he had, he just went and had another one. So he just...
Oh, so he had kids outside of
No, but he has nine kids, and he can't take care of any of them. So he would disappear for days and weeks at a time. He'd go on alcoholic benders and come back. So Audie's poor mom is supporting this large family with no money, right?
Creeping up into the Great Depression, too.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're born in 1925. Depression starts in 29. So his formative years are the Depression. But to be fair, this is one of those families where it doesn't matter anyways.
Yeah, they're poor no matter what.
They're so damn dirt poor that his whole life is just hard scrabble, right? They start out in a house with no electricity. In 1929, the stock market crashes. In 1933, they get evicted from their home. So this family of 9 children is getting evicted for not paying rent because they can't even afford a house with dirt floors and no electricity and no running water. So they end up moving to Celeste, Texas. For a short time, they live in a boxcar, like a converted railroad car, and then they get a house that actually has electricity.
Just
so
think about that for a second. Just like you, as his father, you get evicted, and you're like, okay, let's go find something. You have 9 kids in tow, a wife, probably no job on the horizon.
Right, and and this is not one of those hardworking guys that's going to do anything he can. He just thinks the world's picking on him, so he doesn't do much about it.
So that probably puts something in your kid's head that we better get busy if we want a good life. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And Audie, again, his earliest memories, he remembers the wind howling around the house because this houses are built so poor. And he remembers his brothers and his sisters crying at night because they were hungry, because there wasn't enough food. These are the things that he's learning as a child. Can you imagine being a mother and having to put your kid to bed? Or, you might tell your kid, hey, it's too late to eat, but it's a lot different. We literally have no food. You need to wait till tomorrow. He remembers his sisters crying their eyes out because they were starving, and this is what he gets. So they kind of have this tight family bond. His older sister, Corinne, she's, I think, 14 years older than him. She kind of raises him. She's kind of a mothering figure to him, too, because it's so much for his mom to handle. And his dad's in and out of the picture here, right? Damn. So he loves his older sister, but she's older, too. She's going to get married, and she's going to move on. Audie starts to make friends. He's moving around the neighborhood and stuff. So some of the neighbors feel so bad for him that they're helping take care of him. So they'll give him money to go to the movies and to buy candy. And he falls in love with Western movies because he's from Texas,
Yeah.
But he saves his money instead of buying, just candy for himself and being selfish. He'll buy candy and bring it home to his little brothers and his sisters because he knows that they don't have anything. So he's already kind of taken responsibility for other people, developing that sense of responsibility.
Growing up with nothing like that,
Right.
You know that your brothers have nothing.
Yeah.
You know how much that candy means.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're probably waiting for him. and
Yeah.
stuff.
What a crazy perspective, huh?
Isn't it? It's awful when you think.
Yes.
It's like
But
this
such
with a lot of these
character
people.
building, though. It's one of those weird things that you want to raise your kids to have better than you, but then you
Right.
hear stories like this.
Yeah.
And the character that it creates.
Well, you definitely don't want to coddle people too much to not have character, but I would never want to see my children
No,
crying for.
absolutely
Yeah,
not.
no, I 100%. You hear what you're saying. It's just when I read his story and these other guys' stories, it's like heartbreaking because you can picture these little kids. Because there's pictures of Audie little, and there's pictures of his brothers and their sisters, and you can imagine them crying at night and what that's doing to his mom.
Yeah.
Because she's not a bad person, she's just in a bad situation, and she's you want to help them and you want to do something for them and you can't. When he's 9 years old, he starts first grade. When they move to Celeste, he's finally in a place where he can go to a school system. He's about 2 years older than the other kids. They're all about 7 starting first grade, which is fairly old too.
Yeah.
But this is just that rural lifestyle, right? So even though he's older than the other kids, he's still smaller than them because he's so tiny. He's just a little...
Yeah. Is
Again,
that from malnutrition, you
I
think?
don't know, but I think that's got to be a part of
gotta
it,
be.
right? When you're malnutritioned as a baby, it's going to play a factor. And you'll see pictures of him as a kid, just a small little guy. He liked school. He did well. He studied. He read, but he always was getting in fights because all the other kids picked on him. So in this poor ass Texas town, he was the poorest, basically, right?
Yeah.
His nickname was Little Britches or Little Pants because he only had one pair of overalls. And as he grew taller, they would get higher up, right? So he had overalls that were going up to his knees.
Damn.
So every day he would fight. And he said he just was angry all the time. He said he had pride, but he didn't know where the hell it came from, but he wouldn't let anybody pick on him. So he would just punch everybody who talked to him. So every single day he's going to school and getting in fights. And it almost sounds funny knowing who he is, but think about that as a child too, right?
Going
You can't
through that.
look forward to school because every day you go
Getting bullied.
getting bullied, right? But he
Even
wasn't.
if you're coming out on top,
Right,
it still
right.
sucks.
Yeah, but his teachers liked him, and they saw in him, something of somebody. And again, they're so poor. His teachers would bring their lunches, and they saw Audie with no lunch because they couldn't even send him to school with food. So they didn't want to be like, here's some charity food. So they would bring too much and then give him the extras and stuff, just so he'd have something to eat because he didn't even have any food. One of his teachers said that he was intelligent, industrious, and quick to anger, but always very loyal and very devoted to the ones he loved. It makes me very sad to think how unhappy my fighting Irishman must have been during his lifetime. Because again, they would see that sadness in his eyes, and they would see that, that he was such a good kid, and he could be, if the circumstances allowed him to thrive, but these circumstances didn't.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it before on this show. This is one of those, had the war not come along, what do you think would have happened to Audie? Nothing. He'd have probably been just like his dad on a farm somewhere.
Eventually found the bottle.
Hopefully taking better care of his family, but he would have been, a sharecropper's son, and a sharecropper's grandson. He said his dad had a genius for considering the future, for not considering the future. So Audie's young childhood is work, toil, and misery, right? They got their clothes from charity. The churches in the area would drop clothes and food off to their home because these kids were so poor. So that's kind of what he grew up. So there's like no self-worth there. The cotton picking is not an easy lifestyle either,
it's
right?
gotta
Just,
be awful.
people don't understand it. Cotton picking wasn't just in the Civil War. People still pick cotton to this day. And this
Yeah.
is what these kids are doing. These 6-year-olds, these 7-year-olds, these 10-year-olds. This is what Audie Murphy's
They're
family
not
is doing.
playing with their friends.
Right.
And they're working, but not working to get anything, really.
Right, and you're expected to do a man's labor, right?
Yeah.
So the only escape he had in this was Audie had uncles who served in World War I. They were soldiers, and he
Yeah.
admired soldiers. So when he was in the fields, and he talks about that in his book, he would they would be cutting down the wheat and the chaff and everything, and he would be imagining himself on a battlefield far away with trumpets, and he'd just be fighting, and he would look up to his uncles who had fought, and one of his uncles would still cough from the gas from World War I, like we talked about in the Barger
he thought
episode.
it was cool?
And he admired that. He looked up to it, it's like a scar of honor almost, and he would ask his uncles these pestering questions while they're cutting the weeds and they're doing these things, tell me again what happened, and they would tell him, I looked across the field and I saw the Germans, and he'd say, "What did you do?" And they'd say, "What do you think I did?" And he'd say, "Did you kill him?" And he'd say, "What do you think I did?" And one of his uncles told him a story about how he was in a fortified position and he saw the Germans moving, and his uncle's a farmer too, so he's picking up on these things. The Germans were good soldiers, but everywhere they moved, there was nothing they could do. They would disturb the dew on the plants around him. So he watched and he waited and he opened up on them with his machine gun and he killed them all basically.
Damn.
And he called it the devil's own weapon, the machine gun. So Audie remembered that, and he told him, like he says in his book, one day I'm going to be a soldier, and he's just imagining this heroic escape. That's his only escape. And his uncle, kind of back to reality, coughs. That's, there's lingering effects from the war, and says, "What the hell do you want to be a soldier for?"
Yeah.
And Audie's just internalizing, "I'm going to be a soldier," and
So
his son says,
from a young age.
from a young age, that's what he looks up to and admires, But the reality is, you're in a farm, you're picking cotton and cutting weeds. This is where you are. There's nothing you can do to get out of it until fate steps in.
So do you think that maybe is like the only thing that he had to look at? I mean,
I think that's what a lot of people, the only thing they can have. People...
He didn't have like a businessman uncle. He had
Right,
a soldier uncle.
exactly.
And it's like, oh, I get to go do something cool away
Right,
from here.
exactly. And this is the things he dreams of. You can imagine him in school when they're learning history. These are the guys that he looks up to. I mean, I had a fortunate childhood, but when I was reading you study science, you study this, you study that. When I would hear the stories of heroes like Audie Murphy, I remember being a kid and Audie Murphy's biography came on A&E, and I was 10 years old putting in my VCR or my tape into the VCR to tape it and watching it over until it ran. You look up to these people. You find things that you're fascinated in and you look up to them.
Did Mr. Stevens, our fifth grade teacher, did he have a big effect on that? Or
I was long before that. Yeah.
Was it really?
Yeah, long before that.
I wonder what woke it up in you like that.
Well, it's the same. I mean,
just family.
A lot of little kids want to be athletes and they like football. A lot of kids want to be rappers because they like rap music or whatever, or guitar players or whatever. To me, it was, look at these heroes and look what they've done. And Audie Murphy specifically, look at this small frame person who had the whole world against him, and look what he was able to do.
Yeah.
Right? That great testing ground of combat, and he thrived in that, In 1937, when he was 13 years old, he had to stop going to school.
Why?
Just because they needed him on the farm. I keep saying the farm. They needed him to work. He had to quit quit school and start working full time to help his family. So he starts selling magazines door to door. He's working on other people's farms. He's building. They said some of his neighbors, he would go ask him, "Do you need help with something?"
So he's
can I
14,
help?
15 at this time?
13-ish,
13.
yeah. And they, one of the things that was, about Audie is they would pay him a man's wages because he did a man's job, they said, even as a 13-year-old. And when he's 17, he's 112 pounds. So you can imagine him as a 13-year-old, right?
Jeez.
But he looked at his dad, and he knew he didn't want to be like that. Yeah. And he said he never really hated his dad, but he said he did, he did because he hated quitters, and his dad was a quitter, basically, right? So he didn't want to be like that. So he worked hard at everything he did.
Was there any men in his life at a young age?
Just his uncles.
Just his uncles.
Yeah, but they're, going to be in and out of life too, because everybody's struggling with their own things in during the Great Depression.
Trying to keep their head above water.
Exactly. Huh? So he's looking up to them in certain ways, but he actually did find a neighbor by the name of Haney Lee, who was a farmer who kind of took him in. He lived with him for a while, and he would allow him almost a home life a little bit, right? Because there's so many kids in the Murphy household. They're all different places. His sister Corinne's gone on and married, and she's moved away, but she's still trying to help the family, but she's struggling with their own kids. Audie's living over here.
So he's never getting that like one-on-one attention from people. So
but
he meets a neighbor, and that guy kind of does it.
His neighbor kind of helps him out, but Audie still is. He had almost, I don't want to say an obsession with his mom, but his mom was very beloved to him.
So he's a mama's boy.
He's a mama's boy, and one of his, again, early memories and one of his early jobs, other than pulling weeds and stuff, was he would have to massage his mom's hands, because at the end of the day, when she'd come in, and she's got 9 kids, and she's, a little bit older, but she was 35 when she had Audie, but she probably was aged about 50 years at that time. So you can imagine seeing, the blood and the calluses on your mom's hand that you're looking up to.
Yeah.
And all the kids are crying, and she's being stoic. So one of his jobs was to massage her hands. And he always remembered, wanting to be able to do something for her, but he never really could.
Imagine how crippled he would feel seeing his mom.
Right.
Your mama's boy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. And then seeing him struggle like that, not being able to do anything.
And watching the man that's supposed to be doing something just be a fucking punk. Excuse my language.
Yeah. It is what it is, man. That's got to be a tough. So you can kind of see the groundwork forming.
Right. So Audie was born in 1925. In 1940, his mom's health starts declining. And his dad, who's been in and out of his life, you know, going to jail, going to alcohol, decides he's just going to pack up and leave for good. So when Audie's about 15 years old, his sister saw him just packing a suitcase. She said he put on as many clothes as he could, just one shirt over the other, and he walked out the door, and they never saw him again, basically. Well, he ended up later in life, allegedly, he saw him after he won his medals and everything. But he walked away, and he left his family, right? Jeez. And those are called walkaways. That's what that was.
That was very common, right?
I don't want to say common in the depression, but that was a thing. People would just give up and leave. And, I mean... His name is Emmett Murphy. Emmett had a whole stomach full of giving up, so he just did it again that one final time, right? So he leaves this family. Mom becomes bedridden. She becomes sick. She had an infection in the lining of her heart, and she had pneumonia. So in 1941, when Audie's about 16 years old, his mom died. Oof. And as she died...
Which is huge for him.
Yeah. So that was one of the most formative things in his life. And as she died, he massaged her hands until she passed over, basically, right? And then he... 16 years old, you know, he's older, again, a 16-year-old with his life. He's about a 25-year-old mentally, but he bawled like a baby, and that was one of the times in his life when he just felt broken. And he became kind of a lost soul after that. He wrote later, "She died when I was 16. She had the most beautiful hair I'd ever seen. It reached almost to the floor. She rarely talked and always seemed to be searching for something. What it was, I don't know. We didn't discuss our feelings, but when she passed away, she took something of me with her. It seems I've been searching for it ever since." And like I said, Audie...
That's heavy, dude.
He always talked about just wanting to help her, wanting to do something, and he just never could. And it was so bad that when she died, Audie had to borrow money for the funeral because he's the man of the house at this point, essentially. Right? But they're so poor that he can't even afford the funeral. So now he's 16 years old. He's basically an orphan. He's got younger kids to take care of, and it was actually his mom's wish. So him and his sister Corinne, who's kind of the matriarch of the family, they followed the mom's wishes, and the three youngest siblings had to be put into an orphanage so they could at least stay together, basically, and not be, you know, farmed out.
Damn, that sucks, man.
Yeah, so this is, you know, America's greatest heroes. America's greatest hero, literally, in many senses, Audie Murphy. And, you know, his dad walked away. His mom dies young. I think she was about 50 years old when she died. And his brothers and sisters are in an orphanage, right? And he's bouncing from job to job, working in radio shops, and then he went back to the Haney farm to kind of stay there, and they took him in and gave him kind of a home life that the other places couldn't.
So that's in 41 that his mom dies?
Yeah.
Same year as Pearl Harbor?
Exactly. So that's going to be that big, life-changing event for so many people, but especially for Audie Murphy, right?
Oh, you can see the crash of his life, and then boom.
Perfect timing in a I don't want to say perfect is a good way, but it's just, you know, fate has its way of doing these things.
Yeah.
I use the word fate differently than other people do, but it's just everything kind of coalesced at this perfect time. So December 7th, 1941, he's on a double date when they hear about Pearl Harbor, and he, you know, loses his mind like a lot of these other guys. He was half wild with frustration with
looking
the quote
for
he
purpose.
Used. Right. He's patriotic and he's angry, but add to that, he has no purpose. He's lost, and here's this big, giant crusade, you know, this righteous cause, and it's thrust itself on you. And this is a kid that's been dreaming of being a hero since he's a kid. This is a kid who should have no self-respect and no self-worth, but when someone laughs at him, he punches him in the face, you know? So he's angry and he's bitter anyways, and now this enemy has just attacked his sovereign homeland, you know? So the only problem is he's only 17 years old, right? Well, he's actually 16 at the time in 1941, but when he tries to join, he ends up lying about his age. So in 1941, he's 16, and that's not controversial, but it's you'll read it different ways and different things because he lied about his age in the Army. So it wasn't until he died and they found his birth certificate and his driver's license that had his real age, and he had been asked before and admitted, but he tries to go down and enlist at 16, but again, he probably is barely 100 pounds at the time. So he tries to join the Marines because that's the fighting man's unit, and he wants to go kill the enemy, right? So the Marines laugh at him basically and tell him, you know, we're looking for men, you know, we can't help you. And then he tries to join the Navy, and in the movie they say, we make boys into men, but you're a little bit too much work for us, right? He wants to join the Airborne. He wants to do all these things. The Army recruiter tells him, hey, go eat a bunch of bananas and milk and try to gain some weight and stuff, but he's still too small, so he comes back when he's 17, but now he's got a letter that says he's 18. His sister Corinne signed it for him, basically. So he's going to go lie about his age, right? So in 1942, in June of 1942, again, 5'5", 112 pounds, he goes to the recruiter, okay? And this is a time when people are smaller, people are all those things, but they're still like, kid, you need to show us some proof or we're out of here. So his sister Corinne signed that paper, and he's able to get in. 17 years old, he's in the Army now. So this is, his young life is over and his new life is going to begin.
Yeah.
And this is going to be that monumental time for everybody, but for Audie, this is almost what he's been waiting for, right? You've been asking for this for your whole life, and now here it is,
Boom.
right?
He's probably excited as hell, right?
Right, yeah. And he goes to Camp Walters for basic training in Texas. He'd never been more than 100 miles from his house, and he's about to embark on this, I don't want to say adventure, but adventure.
It is an adventure, man. And he's eating, right? 3 times a day.
Right. And
he's got to be stoked about that.
You got a place to live, a place to eat, a bunk, and everything like that. Audie gets in the Army, and because of that, he loves it. He likes the outdoors. He likes the shooting. He likes the hunting. One thing we didn't talk about a lot, but that they always talk about in Audie Murphy's story, it's a big part of his story, why he was such a good shot. When Audie was a kid, he had a little .22 rifle, and if he would go shooting, everything he shot, the family would eat, right? So if he missed his rounds, like some of these other guys, the family wouldn't eat. So Audie was known as a child for being an expert hunter. And he was
This is just like McKinney, huh?
Exactly. That's what we talked about, Audie and McKinney's story. He was also known, though, he had a crouch stance. He had a hunter's way. He could hear and see things other people do. And even later in life, his friend Spec McClure would say, Audie would be like, you see that bird over there? And he'd be like, what are you talking about? And then sure enough, something would come flying up. He could see and he could hear things better than other people. And he just had this instinctive way.
Crazy.
So Audie grew up hunting to survive, to bring his kids or his brothers and sisters food, right? Squirrels and little things like that, so they could survive. So now he's in the Army, and now he's going to put those skills to use. He can hunt, he can ruck, he can march, he can sleep in a hole, he can do all of those things.
Been doing his whole life.
And now he's got a paycheck too, so he's finally got some real money. So with his first paycheck,
God, imagine how he felt. Like he goes from this insignificant kid who's just overlooked by everybody, picked on,
right?
And now he joins the Army, and all of a sudden he's got a job that he's like a LeBron James type. You know what I mean?
And
like
how many times have we talked about it though? It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. It doesn't matter if you were sleeping on a dirt floor. It doesn't matter if your dad was a loser. Because now
all of a sudden
he
matters,
right?
You know.
But he's still small and malnutrition. So the first time they do close order drill, he actually passes out, and they kind of have to put him in to take care of himself a little bit because he's so physically weak in a sense, right? He spends his first paycheck. Takes that $25 and he sends it home to the funeral home because he owed money to pay for his mom's funeral, right? But yeah, he loves
honorable guy, man.
It just to me though, it speaks of the sadness, right? Like other guys are going out and partying and stuff. He still has to pay for his mom because.
But he did it.
But he did it. He absolutely did
There's
it.
There's something about sending that check over that's crazy,
right? Because he's not going to leave that debt because he probably knows what that means to them too. That funeral home did him a favor, by doing that for him. So
God,
he's
I
not
love
going to
this
let
generation,
that go,
man.
right? So he goes through, like we said, it's a 13-week basic training. Army life suits him. He becomes one of the best in the battalion, but he struggles with his baby face and the way he looks. So all the other soldiers automatically start calling him baby. Look at you, you little. Did your mom know you're here? Kind of stuff. But he shows them every time they go on road marches, he can take it. Every time they go shoot, he's the best. Every time they're doing all of these things.
So he's earning their respect?
He's earning their respect. But again, they go get their shots, their immunizations, and again, as soon as they go to training after that, he passes out again because he's just partly
body's not used to
his
it.
body's not used to it, and he's never been around all these people. So one of the company commanders sees him and tries to do him a favor, and they say like, "Hey kid, you're not cut out for the infantry. You're too small. You're too weak. I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to make you a cook." So they try to send him to cook school basically, and he throws a fit and he tells them basically, you're going to have to put me in jail before you get me out of the infantry. I'm not going to do it. So they're kind of back off and they're like, okay, fine. They send him to Fort Meade for further training. Again, he's thriving there. They send him on a guard detail. They give him a shotgun and he's guarding 2 prisoners. One of them was a rapist and one of them is a murderer. Audie's 5'5". These guys are big, huge guys, right? It's not a significant story, but I just like it because it's his temperament. While he's escorting these prisoners around, they look like they're trying to plan an escape, and one of them says something to him, and Audie clicks the safety off of the shotgun and raises it up, and they go, "What are you going to do?" And he goes, "I'll kill you. I'll shoot you both right now," right? And there was something in him enough, and you'll see this throughout his life, that they believed him. So they go back, and then he reports to his CO, and he tells him what happened. And he said, "What would you really have done if they tried to escape?" And he said, "I would have killed both of them right there," right? He's got this nerve that he just always has.
He's ready to go.
Right. So he's training with his unit. He gets assigned. They're getting ready to get sent overseas. And once again, an officer sees him, and they're like, "Hey, buddy, you're not cut out for the infantry. So they decide they're going to send him to work in the PX, which is the shopping center there, right? And again, Audie freaks out. He refuses. He demands to be sent to a combat unit. He throws a fit. So they go, okay, fine. You want to go to combat? You're going to get your wish. Yeah, if you want to die, we're trying to help you. If you don't want to, it is what it is. So he ends up in Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, 1943. Have you ever seen the movie Casablanca? I don't even know why I'm asking.
Nope.
Okay. Casablanca is one of the greatest movies of all time.
Is it?
But it's about North Africa, right? So they actually, while he's at Camp Kilmer, they watch this new movie, Casablanca. And then he boards the ship, and they sail across the sea for 11 days, and they land in Casablanca. So it's kind of this cool thing,
okay.
you know,
So
this movie that had just come out, just like all the other episodes that we talked about. Of course, he's seasick. He's never been 100 miles from home in dead center of Texas, right? Or actually, it's northern Texas. Now he's on a ship. Now he's surrounded by all these other guys. Now he's on these bunks. They're doing these anti-submarine drills. They're wearing their big vests. Guys are throwing up everywhere. There's risk of torpedoes.
Misery.
But this is what he wanted. This is what he's been striving for. In February 20th, 1943, they land in Casablanca. They get put in what we call a cattle car. If anybody's ever been in the Army or the Marine Corps, you know what that is. It's basically, it's like a truck. You'd put cattle in it, but they just shove bodies in there. It's almost like in a terrible way. If you've seen Schindler's List when they shove the body, they do that with soldiers. So they all get shoved in the cattle cars, and they take a 60-mile trip to the replacement depot, right? Which is, again, he's assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division, which is one of the most fighting units in World War II.
Yeah. Is he staying with his guys the whole time?
Yeah, so this is going to be his guys for as long as they survive, right?
Damn.
So he's going to start with these group of guys, and they're going to kind of peter out until he's essentially the last one left. But in North Africa, a kid from Texas who's dreamed of faraway things. Now he's in this Arab world where there's guys on camels, and there's kids selling things on the side of the road, and there's people speaking Arabic, and there's people speaking all these other languages.
What a trip that must have been, man.
Isn't it crazy though how if the war hadn't come along, someone like Murphy or someone like these other people, they'd never see it anywhere. But now they're going to be seeing, soldiers going to Egypt, they're going to China, they're going to the Middle East, they're going all over these places.
These cultures, which is hilarious now we kind of take for granted because of the internet. We get to see all parts of the world in real time.
But we also get to see a muted, almost McDonald's version of the world too, right? These guys were saying... North Africa in 1943, it was a lot different than North Africa in 2021. If you go to North Africa now, if you go to Tunisia, you go to these places, you might find some culture, but you're going to be paying American dollars, and you're going to have your iPhone and your Pepsis and your Cokes. They're seeing the real world as it was, right? Yeah, not even just in the trenches. They're seeing reality. Like, this is how these cultures actually live. We're seeing a touristy version of it, But in 1943, it's going to be a lot different. So... if you know anything about the Africa campaign, we've talked about it before with the Kasserine Pass, where we basically got our asses handed to us and all this. The British were doing an excellent job fighting the Africa Corps under Rommel, who's one of the greatest leaders in military history. The German that we were fighting, Erwin Rommel. Audie's, chomping at the bit, wanting to get in the fight, but they end up missing out on the action, right? Other guys in his unit have been in this action and stuff, but they keep getting the word, hey, we're going to go over here, but the German Africa Corps ends up surrendering. So Audie's terribly disappointed, but everybody else, all the old-timers are kind of like,
sweet.
Thank God we don't have to fight these guys today, and he says later, I was so disappointed, but knowing what I knew later, I probably wouldn't have been as disappointed that I missed out on the action, but that's just kind of what he wants. So instead of combat, it turns into training. They get 3 months of training, just this intensive combat training, because this is where we sent our troops overseas expecting, to fight the Germans and to do well, and they just attacked us, mechanized warfare, and we were cut off, we were destroyed, and we did very poorly, essentially. Yeah. So now we're using all these skills and all these lessons that we've learned, and we're training hard. So in these 3 months in Africa, he's learning more than he ever did in any of his basic training, and he's learning from guys, and he's with these guys that have survived this combat, and to survive a loss is almost more than to survive a victory in a lot of these senses. So these guys are teaching him, and they're training him, and he's surrounded by these people, and he's learning from them, and he's looking up to them. So he's making friends with guys in the unit, and then they're getting ready for their next phase of combat.
So as he's training, he's one of the guys now. He's not the little baby-faced dude, or...
He's still one of the baby-faced dudes, but he's going to be coming over with a lot of other replacements, right?
Yeah.
And he keeps doing well because he's made an acting corporal on the way over. So he's obviously, despite his baby face, he's impressing people, and he's doing well. But you never hear any stories about people picking on him in his unit or anything. They just give him those nicknames, and they call him baby and stuff. So he's definitely one of the guys, because it's going to be this weird hodgepodge of the North Africa vets, the brand new guys, the guys that have been in the Army for a long time, but they haven't seen combat and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. So he's not getting picked on the whole way through or anything.
No, I don't think Audie Murphy would let anybody pick on him. But he's not having to fight for his dignity either.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of hear that he's like the small guy, hoping that he's not getting messed with the whole time.
I think other guys would have seen his eagerness to fight, though, and seen that he had 2 chances to get out of it, and he didn't. Yeah. So that probably helped. So after Africa, Murphy's unit and a lot of other units, they're going to take part in the invasion of Sicily. So if you remember, we talked about before, we have to invade Fortress Europe. So we want to go through France, like D-Day, but they're going to go through what they call the soft underbelly of Europe, Italy, which turned out to be a horrendous campaign. So he takes part in the invasion of Sicily, which is Operation Husky. In July of 1943, it's the largest seaborne invasion up to that time, right? All these ships are out in the water, rough seas. Audie's units on the ships throwing up. They're seasick. They're dealing with all this, and then the sea turns calm, and then they land. Audie wasn't in the initial invasion force, so they're watching these other troops land. Audie's unit lands at around 8 o'clock on July 10th of 1943. This is going to be his indoctrination to combat. If you remember, we talked about Sicily before. The Italians are surrendering and running, but the Germans are fighting hard, right? As he lands, he's seeing bodies. He's seeing this first taste of combat. He's hearing the artillery shells, and there's sporadic fire, but it's nothing intense. It's kind of a good indoctrination in that sense. And he's realizing, you're feeling that cold hand in your intestines, as he would refer to it later. Am I going to be able to make it? Am I going to be able to do it? And he's realizing, okay, I can do this. This is not that bad. As they push inland, they're passing the signs of battle, but they're not seeing any yet. And then they take a rest on a hill, and Audie's laying on his back, and he looks over and he sees one of the American soldiers sitting up on a rock, just kind of looking out. And then all of a sudden, the German artillery starts coming in. It starts whining. So Audie does as he's trained. He grabs his helmet, he rolls over on his stomach, and he kind of curls up. And you can hear the artillery, and you can feel the ground shaking, right? Now it's kind of like, oh, shit, it's real. And then when he looks up and the barrage is over, they look around, and everybody's okay. And the soldier that had been sitting on the rock, he's now laying there, and he's got just a trickle of blood from his mouth. No injuries. He looks completely fine, right? But one of the Africa vets of the campaign in Africa walks over to him, and he just looks at him, and he goes, he's dead, right? And Audie realizes how quickly life can kind of just be taken from you in that sense. The North Africa vet says, tell somebody else, get his ammo. He's not going to need it anymore. You are. So that's kind of this wake-up call to these new guys.
Damn.
How cheap your life is and how quickly your life can
take his ammo.
Be taken, right? Just take his ammo. He's dead, I don't care who he was. And they even mentioned he was a good guy. He fought in North Africa. He's a veteran, but he shouldn't have been up on the rock like that. And it is what it is. So let's move in. We don't have time.
Not a lot of affectedness.
We don't have time to mourn. We don't have time to cry. We got to push forward. So take his ammo and let's go in. So they start moving forward, and the Sicilian campaign was actually more successful than we thought it was going to be. We're moving forward at a rapid pace, so it's almost like they're chasing the combat. They're moving forward, and they're expecting to fight, and then the battle's rolling behind them, right?
Yeah.
So as they're moving, they're walking online, and they're looking, and then 2 Italian officers jump up, grab on their horses, and take off. Instead of surrendering like they're supposed to, they try to make a break for it. So a lot of these Americans are fresh. They're trying to figure out, what do I do? Audie immediately does Audie Murphy. He runs up, he takes a kneeling position, he raises his rifle, and he fires 2 shots. Pop, pop. And he kills both of the soldiers, right? So these Italian soldiers who are moving targets on their horses, riding away from them, Audie fires twice, and both of the soldiers crumple into the ground, and they died. So it's just...
People are looking at that probably going,
right,
damn.
Holy shit, you gunslinger, right?
Yeah.
But in this short time, so now he's seen death, and he's caused death, and he later says, and I always love this quote, "Now I have shed my first blood. I feel no qualms, no pride, and no remorse. There's only a weary indifference that will follow me throughout the war." So he's not like, oh, I'm so badass, or like, oh, that was amazing, or oh my God, I'm devastated. It was literally just, it was just, whatever. It's my job, and I did it, right? But now he knows that he can do it. So they keep pushing forward, and they're in this combat that he's dreamed for his whole life, but now he's kind of seeing right away, this isn't what I expected. And he's with these guys that have already seen a little bit of it, and they already have had their fill, but he's quickly realizing war isn't what he thought it was as a kid. On July 13th, 1943, they're pushing forward. As they're moving, a machine gun opens up on a hillside, right? So everybody hits the dirt. Again, you can imagine all these young Americans. This is their first combat. Everybody trying to figure out what to do. While they're trying to figure out what to do, Audie springs to his feet, rushes forward, and just starts firing his Garand. This 115-pound guy with his 10-pound rifle just firing, screaming, "Come on, let's go, follow me." So they do. They push forward, and they knock the German emplacement out. And this is just every day over here, right?
So he's taken a leadership position.
He's taken a leadership right away, and everybody that served with him just said he had this knack for combat. One of the soldiers, they mentioned something I always thought was funny. They said he could run at a crouch faster than anyone they'd ever seen. Like, not a full stand-up. He had a combat crouch where he was almost ducked to the ground, and he could sprint like that, and it was just from
Crazy.
all his years and all his things, and he has that sharp vision and those skills. He can bring his rifle up and he can snap it. He can get those shots off. We were talking about shooting earlier, right? You need to take that time to level your sights. We have a saying, fast is fine, but accuracy is everything. In a gunfight, you need to take your time in a hurry. He could do that. He could get those fractions of a second, line up his sights and get those shots and actually kill with those shots, right? So he ends up making corporal because of this. So this kind of short Sicilian campaign, he kind of proves his mettle. And as they're pushing through, the Italians, the Sicilians are greeting them as liberators. They're giving them the wine and the grapes. So this is maybe some ways what he thought combat was going to be like. He's killed several men already. He's seen people die.
They're celebrating him.
Right. But despite that, again, another officer decides that they're going to help him out, and they decide, you're not fit for combat, we'll make you a runner.
What?
Because of his size.
Yeah.
So they send him back to be a runner, running messages through the lines, but he keeps just going back to his unit. So they finally tell him, you've been causing a lot of trouble for us back here. If you want to be in that combat so bad, we're going to make it easy on us. Go back to your damn unit, right?
Yeah.
But he's a corporal now, so he's doing what he wants. In the Sicilian campaign, General Patton, you haven't seen the movie Patton, I'm sure. There's
seen
a scene,
parts of it.
Okay, well, they're racing for Salerno. They're trying to beat the British to Salerno. So Audie and his unit become victims of this foot race, right? So rather than moving at a leisurely pace, they are almost at a jot, like an airborne shuffle. They're racing across this island trying to beat the British. They're moving so fast that they don't have time to stop and eat. Have you ever tried to walk and drink water?
No.
Or next time you're walking with a canteen or a soda or something, try to walk at a fast pace and drink. It's very difficult, but that's what they're doing. They're opening their cans on their back and they're trying to slurp them down because they don't even have time to stop and eat, right?
And that's because Patton's in competition, right?
Yeah, that's because Patton wants to beat the British to Palermo, essentially. They're dealing with this rocky terrain, these mountainy hillsides. It's miserable to move. Because of the time of the year, there's just dust and clouds everywhere, because they're kicking up all this dust. So it's just this choking heat, and you're slurping down your food, your rations, and you're trying to drink water, and you're running out of water, and you're getting miserable. So Audie starts getting a little sick. He starts getting covered in sweat. His stomach starts to turn. We all know that feeling, right?
Yep.
He starts feeling like shit. His internal organs are rumbling, but he doesn't want to look weak, even though he's fallen out several times. He wants to stick with his unit. So eventually he falls out to the side and he just starts throwing up. He starts puking his guts out, right? So some officers in a Jeep come up and they go, hey, you need to get to the rear. And he tells them off, but then he kind of says, all right, yes, sir. But he doesn't. He jumps back in line and he tries to stay because he doesn't want to be thought of as weak.
Yeah.
But a little bit longer, sickness overtakes him and he ends up blacking out and they have to take him to the rear, right? So despite all of his combat effectiveness, despite all his badassery, his body's not as tough as his mind is. So he blacks out. In the book To Hell and Back, he said it was malaria, but I've read elsewhere that he literally just had a fever. He was just, he didn't want to admit to even having that fever.
Yeah.
So they end up putting him behind the lines and he has to spend some time in the hospital recovering. Eventually he gets put back with his unit and then they push towards Messina, which is another city. Eventually, they take Sicily, and this is the end of his first combat campaign, the end of his first invasion, if you will. And it's actually a decent time to stop here, I think. So
that'll be episode 1 of Audie Murphy.
We're going to be doing a multiple episode one on this because
there's so much.
I use my notes to write this. Usually, I'll have 2 or 3 pages of notes. This one I have like 30, and we want to kind of do what it's due. So, like we talked about before, a lot of people know Audie Murphy's story, but I want to get into a little bit of all the little things he did.
Yeah.
People might know his Medal of Honor action, but they don't know his DSC action or his Silver Star, et cetera.
Well, you just laid the groundwork. You could see like just the little stuff that I do know. That actually helped make me understand it a little more,
Right.
why he was the way he was.
And it's when you see the pictures that we're going to add on here and how small he is. Again, if you've ever seen the movie To Hell and Back, which I'm sure you haven't,
Nope.
Where he actually played himself, you look at him and you go, God, he's so young. But that's 10 years after.
All this.
10 years after when they made the movie.
Jeez.
When you see him how he was, and again, he hasn't earned a single medal yet in what we've talked about, right?
Yeah.
But he's already killed 2 Italian officers. He's already risen to his feet and pushed forward on that hill when other guys were staying down. He's already, refused 3 chances. Yeah. Gone through all the things he did as a child.
And how old is he at this point?
He'd be 17 still here.
He's
17 or 18. Yeah,
After
17 or 18.
all that, he's only 17 years old.
17 or 18. So hopefully you guys stay tuned or you listen to our next episodes. Yep. We're going to do a couple part. This might be 3 parts based probably. I thought we'd get a little further today, but
3-part will be good.
Yeah, we'll there's
a lot to cover.
There's quite a bit to cover. So
all right.
Appreciate you guys listening.
Thanks. Stay tuned for part 2. Audie Murphy.
All right. Have
Later,
a good one.
guys.